At 2:01 a.m. on January 3, 2026, American helicopters touched down at a military compound in Caracas. Within 30 minutes, President Nicolas Maduro was in handcuffs, being flown to an aircraft carrier. The official charges: narcoterrorism. The official narrative: bringing a dictator to justice. But if you think this was about Maduro or about drugs, you're missing what actually happened. This was about China. More specifically, this was about 2 decades of Chinese economic penetration into Latin America, finally triggering an American structural response. Trump calls it the Donroe Doctrine, a supersized Monroe Doctrine for the 21st century. What it actually represents is something more consequential: the opening move in a great power collision over resources, infrastructure, and hemispheric control that has no obvious off-ramp. While America spent 20 years fighting in the Middle East and bleeding credibility in Ukraine, China quietly became the dominant economic power in America's backyard. Not through invasion, through ports, power lines, and lithium contracts. The Donroe Doctrine is Washington's answer: economic coercion, military force, and a binary choice forced on every Latin American government: align with us or face consequences. The problem is that China can't walk away. Its economy structurally depends on Latin American resources, which means we're not looking at a crisis that gets resolved. We're looking at sustained collision between two powers with incompatible requirements competing over the same geographic space. The structural shift: how China displaced U.S. economic dominance in Latin America. The numbers tell you everything you need to know about what happened while America wasn't paying attention. In 2000, China's trade with Latin America was $12 billion, negligible. By 2024, it hit $518 billion. That's a 40-fold increase in 24 years. China is now the top trading partner for Brazil, Chile, Peru, Uruguay, and Argentina. Let me put that differently. For every major South American economy that actually matters, China has already displaced the United States as the primary economic relationship. But trade statistics are abstractions. The real story is infrastructure. In November 2024, China opened the Chancay port in Peru, a $3.5 billion deep-water megaport majority owned by COSCO, a Chinese state company. This isn't some minor facility. Chancay handles ships too large for the Panama Canal and creates a direct maritime corridor from Shanghai to South America that completely bypasses North American ports. What used to take 35 days now takes 23. Costs dropped 20%. China's ambassador called it the Shanghai of South America. That's visible infrastructure. The invisible kind might matter more. China's State Grid Corporation has invested $12.5 billion in Brazil's power sector. They control critical portions of the electrical grid supplying São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro. If you live in Brazil's largest cities, your lights stay on because of Chinese infrastructure. Then there's lithium. The lithium triangle, Bolivia, Argentina, Chile, holds 60% of global lithium reserves. This is the battery metal that makes electric vehicles possible. Bolivia alone has double Chile's lithium resources. And until very recently, Bolivia's state lithium company had billion-dollar deals with China's CATL, the world's largest battery manufacturer. Without South American lithium, there is no American green transition, no domestic EV industry, and China has been systematically locking up access while Washington was distracted elsewhere. Decoding the Donroe Doctrine, the 4 operational pillars. Trump's December 2025 national security strategy runs 31 pages. 5 of those pages focus specifically on Latin America. More than Europe, more than Asia. That allocation tells you where priority has shifted. The document explicitly identifies non-hemispheric competitors as existential threats to American security. That's diplomatic language for China, Russia, and Iran. The strategy states America will use leverage in finance and technology to induce countries to reject what it calls low-cost foreign assistance, meaning Chinese investment. Translation: choose us or face consequences. The Donroe Doctrine operates on 4 pillars. First, the Western Hemisphere is now officially priority number 1. This isn't rhetoric, it's resource allocation and strategic focus. Second, economic coercion is the primary instrument. Trump announced Liberation Day in April 2025, a baseline 10% tariff on virtually all imports, but the real weapon is secondary sanctions. Countries that maintain Chinese economic relationships face escalating penalties. Mexico already got the message. Under intense pressure, Claudia Sheinbaum's government is advancing legislation to impose tariffs up to 50% on Chinese goods, specifically to prevent Beijing from using Mexico as a backdoor into the American market. Third, military force is explicitly on the table. Venezuela proved this isn't bluster. Maduro was a pariah state with no powerful friends willing to fight for him, which made him the easy first target. But the doctrine goes further. Secretary of State Marco Rubio traveled to Panama within weeks of taking office, delivering an ultimatum: reduce Chinese influence over the canal or face American measures. Panama got the message. Hutchison Holdings, the Hong Kong company operating ports at both ends of the canal, is now selling those assets to a BlackRock-led American consortium. Fourth is the carrot and stick sorting mechanism. Bolivia's new president, Rodrigo Paz, elected in late 2025, is already terminating lithium contracts with China and Russia. In exchange, Washington is offering IMF credit lines and technology transfers. Argentina's Javier Milei has become Trump's closest regional ally. The hemisphere is being divided: allies and adversaries, dollar or yuan. The resource trap. The resource trap. Why China cannot walk away. The question everyone should be asking is why China doesn't just leave, cut losses, redirect trade, find alternative suppliers. The answer is brutally simple: it can't. China's economy is structured around manufacturing exports and resource imports. It needs Brazilian iron ore for steel production. It needs Chilean copper for electronics and construction. It needs Bolivian lithium for batteries. It needs Venezuelan oil for energy security. These aren't luxuries or diversification plays. These are existential inputs for the Chinese manufacturing model. If America successfully forces Latin America to choose, and Latin America mostly chooses America, China faces resource strangulation, not immediately, not catastrophically, but slowly and steadily. The raw materials that feed Chinese industry become more expensive, harder to access, subject to American approval. That's strategically unacceptable to Beijing, which means China will fight back. We're already seeing the playbook. Hours after the Venezuela strike, China conducted Justice Mission 2025 military exercises, simulating blockades of Taiwan's largest ports. The message was unmistakable: if you can conduct military operations to secure your strategic interests, so can we. In May 2025, Xi Jinping hosted the 4th China CELAC Forum in Beijing. Leaders from across Latin America attended. Xi announced a new $9 billion credit line for the region. New free trade agreements were signed with Ecuador and Nicaragua. Colombia joined the Belt and Road Initiative. Chinese exports to Latin America grew 8% in 2025, even as exports to the United States fell 18%. Beijing is adapting, finding new routes, new partners, new ways to maintain position. This is the escalation trap. America acts in its hemisphere. China acts in its neighborhood. Each action justifies the other. Each response raises the stakes. Unlike the Cuban Missile Crisis, which was a single crisis that could be resolved through negotiation, this is structural competition over the economic arteries of the global system. There's no missile to remove, no single concession that fixes it. Either China maintains resource access to Latin America, or America reasserts hemispheric dominance. Both cannot happen simultaneously. The critical battlegrounds and flashpoints. Mexico is the front line. Mexico isn't just America's largest trading partner, it's the linchpin of Chinese supply chain circumvention. Chinese companies have been building phantom factories in Mexico, importing components and re-exporting them to the United States under USMCA tariff exemptions. The USMCA itself is up for renegotiation in 2026. Trump is demanding not just trade concessions, but security cooperation that amounts to American operational control over Mexican territory. The justification is cartels, fentanyl, migration. But the real issue is that Mexico is the last major barrier preventing American companies from completely decoupling from Chinese manufacturing. Trump's threat to designate cartels as terrorist organizations isn't symbolic. That would give the U.S. military legal authority to conduct operations inside Mexico, With or without Mexican consent, Brazil presents a different challenge. This isn't a weak state that can be bullied. Brazil is the world's ninth largest economy. It has the Amazon, it has oil, it has agricultural exports that both America and China need. Lula has made clear he won't choose sides. Brazil is a founding BRICS member. At the May 2025 China CELAC Summit, Lula stood beside Xi Jinping, announcing $3 billion in new Chinese renewable energy investments. But the Trump administration initially slapped 40% tariffs on Brazilian agricultural exports to demonstrate the leverage America holds. The question is whether Brazil can maintain strategic autonomy when both superpowers are demanding alignment. Then there are the flashpoints almost no one is discussing. Nicaragua revived its long-dormant plan for an interoceanic canal in November 2024, 445 kilometers connecting the Atlantic to the Pacific, dwarfing Panama's 80-kilometer route. The pitch made directly to Chinese investors is a canal wide enough to handle the megaships Panama can't accommodate. The price tag is between $50 and $80 billion. Only a state actor could finance it. If China's access to the Panama Canal becomes untenable under American pressure, Beijing has a backup plan sitting on the table. Argentina hosts the only deep-water port capable of servicing Antarctic operations, Ushuaia. The December 2025 National Security Strategy explicitly extends the Donroe Doctrine to Antarctica. That's not an accident. The vulnerability at the heart of the doctrine. The Donroe Doctrine operates on a fundamental assumption that America can win through coercion what it already lost through neglect, that Latin American countries will ultimately choose Washington over Beijing, that economic pressure and military threats will be enough to roll back 2 decades of Chinese integration. But what if that assumption is wrong? For many Latin American countries, China offers something America doesn't: investment without conditions, infrastructure without lectures, partnership without ultimatums. The United States has free trade agreements with 11 Latin American countries. But what has America actually built in the region in the last 20 years? Where are the American ports, the American power lines, the American railways? The answer is nowhere. America offered ideology. China offered concrete. The numbers are moving in the wrong direction for Washington. Chinese exports to Latin America grew 8% in 2025, even as exports to the United States fell 18%. Beijing is adapting faster than the doctrine anticipated. State Grid is building more power lines in Brazil. BYD is opening electric vehicle factories. New financing mechanisms are being developed to work around dollar-based sanctions. The 20-year era of Latin American countries playing both sides is ending, but not necessarily the way Washington expects. Maduro's fate serves as demonstration effect. Choose wrong and end up in a Manhattan jail cell. Bolivia's Paz pivoted immediately after taking office. Panama's Mulino folded under pressure. Argentina's Milei never needed convincing. But not everyone will comply. Brazil won't abandon its China relationship without a fight. Mexico's nationalism runs deep. Cuba and Nicaragua are ideologically committed to resisting American hegemony. The Cold War taught a clear lesson. When great powers collide, small nations become battlegrounds. Latin America is about to learn what it means to be the battlefield. The Donroe Doctrine isn't just a policy. It's a declaration that neutrality is no longer an option, that the era of multi-alignment is over. The choice being forced on leaders from Mexico City to Buenos Aires isn't what is right or just, but what is survivable. That's the vulnerability. This doctrine is trying to restore dominance through force in a region where America lost influence through absence. Hegemons that overreach historically turn friends into enemies. The risk is that coercion might push fence-sitters toward China, creating the anti-American coalition Washington has feared since the Cold War. We're watching a structural collision with no clear resolution mechanism. 2 great powers with incompatible resource requirements are competing over the same geographic space. China needs Latin American iron ore, copper, lithium, and oil to feed its manufacturing economy. America needs hemispheric dominance to maintain global power projection. The mathematics don't allow both outcomes simultaneously. The Donroe Doctrine is a high-stakes gamble. It might succeed in rolling back Chinese influence, securing the Panama Canal, locking up the Lithium Triangle, and reasserting American control over strategic choke points. Or it might accelerate the very thing it's trying to prevent, pushing countries deeper into Chinese orbit, fracturing hemispheric unity, and demonstrating the limits of coercive power when deployed against economic integration built over 2 decades. There's no middle ground available. Either China maintains its resource access, or America reasserts hemispheric control. The outcome will determine whether the Donroe Doctrine is remembered as the restoration of American power, or as the moment America lost its backyard, trying to reclaim it through force. The stakes couldn't be higher. The outcome couldn't be less certain. I want to hear your perspectives on this. Which way does this break? Can America coerce what it couldn't build? Will Latin America choose sovereignty or survival? Drop your observations in the comments below. If this analysis helped you see the structural forces at work, hit that like button and share this with someone who needs to understand what's actually happening. And if you want to keep tracking how this collision unfolds as the architecture of global power shifts in real time, subscribe to this channel. We're all watching the same system. Let's decode it together. The opening shots have been fired. The battle lines are being drawn. And somewhere in Caracas, in a country now under American supervision, the ghost of the Donroe Doctrine has risen from its grave. It has a new name now, and it's hungry.